I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story like this, but I guess life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. My wife, Emily, and I have been together for almost 15 years. We met in college, that time when everything seems new and exciting, and we just clicked from the start. It wasn't one of those love at first sight things. No, it was slower, something that built over time until one day, I couldn't imagine my life without her. Emily's smart, confident, the kind of person you'd want in your corner if things go south. But she's also complex. The kind of complex that keeps you on your toes. Over the years, I noticed how good she was at hiding things, small things at first. A secretive side, little lies that didn't seem to matter much. She was good at it, almost too good. I used to laugh it off. She's just private, I'd tell myself. And why not? She was always so adamant that she'd never let anyone hurt her. She had this impenetrable shell around her, something I admired but never questioned, until recently. See, the last 6 months have been rough. Looking back, I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Our relationship just felt off. The little things started adding up. She'd become distant, distracted even when we were together. I started feeling like I was intruding in her life, like she was building this wall between us. You know how you can just sense something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it? That's how I felt for months. I couldn't shake the feeling, but I kept convincing myself it was stress from work, or maybe I was just being paranoid. I'm not the jealous type, never have been. Emily always made me feel secure in our relationship. But then there were these subtle changes. She started going to yoga more often, which wasn't strange in itself. She's always been into staying fit, but it was the frequency. She'd come home late, claiming the class ran longer, or she and some friends went for drinks afterward. I didn't question it. Why would I? It was yoga, right? The real shift came when I overheard her talking on the phone late one night. She thought I was asleep, but something about the way she whispered caught my attention. When I asked her who she was talking to, she brushed it off with a laugh, saying it was a friend from class asking about some yoga retreat. That was the first real crack, the first time my gut screamed at me that something wasn't right. But I still let it go. I've always been the guy who trusts his wife. She's never given me a reason not to, but that trust was starting to feel fragile. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Maybe I was scared of what I'd find out, or maybe part of me wanted to believe that it was all in my head. That if I just ignored it long enough, things would go back to normal. But things didn't go back to normal. And that was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. It's funny how, when things start to unravel, you look back and wonder how you missed the signs. The small things that didn't seem so important at the time suddenly feel like bright, flashing neon warnings. About 6 months ago, Emily's behavior really started to change. I told myself it was just a phase, that everyone goes through rough patches. But the distance between us kept growing. It wasn't just emotional, either. We used to be close, physically and emotionally. That connection, it was what made us. But now, it was like being with a stranger. She'd come home from work, we'd have dinner, and she'd just disappear, either into her phone or out with friends. I'd try to talk to her about it, but she'd brush me off. Every time. She started snapping at me over the smallest things, too. If I asked how her day was, it was like I was prying into some deep secret. Or if I mentioned how often she was at yoga, she'd get defensive, telling me I needed to trust her, that she deserved some time for herself. I didn't even think I was being unreasonable. I just wanted to understand why things felt so off between us. But every question I asked felt like it pushed her further away. One night, I remember coming home from work, tired and stressed. I was hoping for a quiet evening, maybe order some takeout and watch a movie like we used to. But when I got home, she wasn't there. I texted her, asked where she was, and she replied, "At yoga, be home late." It had become her default response. She was always at yoga. That night, as I sat in our quiet house, I couldn't help but feel isolated. It was as if I was sharing my life with someone who wasn't really there anymore. I thought about calling her, but what would I even say? Hey, I miss you. That would probably just trigger another argument about how she needed space. So, I left it alone, like I'd done so many times before. But things were about to change. The signs were too clear now, and no amount of ignoring them could make them disappear. I noticed she started hiding her phone more, taking it with her to the bathroom, to bed, everywhere. The carefree, open way we used to share everything was gone. I'd catch glimpses of her, swiping away notifications like she didn't want me to see. And when I'd ask who she was texting, her answers were vague. Just a friend from yoga, she'd say, before quickly changing the subject. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was this nagging feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. Something was wrong, and deep down, I knew it. But I didn't have any proof. Just a gut feeling and a growing distance between us. The late nights out, the secretive phone calls, the way she becomes so protective of her privacy, it was all there, laid out in front of me like pieces of a puzzle. But I wasn't ready to put them together yet. I wasn't ready to admit what might really be going on. Because once you start down that path, once you start asking the hard questions, you can't unask them. And I wasn't sure I was ready for the answers. A few weeks after that night alone, things started getting even weirder. Emily's behavior wasn't just distant anymore, it was secretive. I felt like I was living with a stranger who was always on edge, always one step ahead of my questions. One Saturday, she was heading out the door to yoga again. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but something inside me snapped. I asked her, why don't we spend the day together instead? We haven't had time just the two of us in a while. She barely looked at me. I have plans after yoga, she said, grabbing her bag like she was already late. Plans with who? I asked, not even thinking about how it sounded. The look she gave me then, it was like I had insulted her, like asking who she was spending time with was crossing some line. I don't need to report my every move to you, Jake. It stung. I wasn't trying to control her, but her reaction felt like she was hiding something. Or worse, like I had no right to even ask. She stormed out before I could say anything else, and I just stood there, wondering how we had gotten here. That afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling. There was something off, something that didn't add up. I started replaying the past few months in my head, her new, yoga obsession, the phone always glued to her hand, the late nights, the constant tension. It was like a movie I didn't want to watch, but I couldn't stop the reel from spinning. By that evening, Emily still wasn't home. I texted her, asking when she'd be back, and she replied, later. Just like that. Nothing else. I had no idea what she was doing or who she was with. It was the same as always, vague answers that left me feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. So, I did something I had never done before. I started looking through her stuff. It wasn't planned, and I felt like crap doing it, but I had to know. I went through her bag, checked her phone bills, even scrolled through her social media. Nothing. I found nothing. For a second, I actually felt relief. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe everything was fine, and I was just overthinking things because we'd been in a rough patch. But then I found her yoga schedule crumpled up in her gym bag. And that's when my stomach dropped. According to the schedule, her class ended at 6 p.m., 3 hours ago. But she still wasn't home. What was she doing in those 3 hours? I stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it. The old me would have let it go. The me that trusted her completely, that never once doubted her. But something had changed. I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. Not after months of feeling like I was losing her without any explanation. When she finally came home that night, I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. Every word she said felt like it had a hidden meaning. And the worst part? I didn't even confront her. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed something concrete, something more than just a bad feeling and a crumpled up schedule. Because once I brought it up, once I accused her of lying to me, there'd be no going back. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. I was trapped between wanting to know the truth and being terrified of what that truth might be. The cracks were deepening, and I knew sooner or later, something had to give. The next few days felt like I was living in some kind of twilight zone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it. But life went on. Emily kept going to her yoga classes like clockwork, and I kept pretending everything was fine, even though every instinct in me screamed that it wasn't. Then, she slipped up. It was a Wednesday, a regular midweek evening. I had gotten home early from work, hoping we could actually have dinner together. I made her favorite, nothing fancy, just pasta and wine. She got home around 8:30, which was late but not unusually late, considering her yoga schedule. As soon as she walked in, I could tell something was off. Her hair was a mess, not like the way it usually was after yoga, where she'd come back with that post-workout glow. This time, she looked flustered. Like she had rushed to get here. "Hey," I said casually, trying to keep things normal. "How was yoga?" She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to notice. "Good. Really good." "What's for dinner?" she asked, quickly moving past the question, heading straight for the kitchen. I watched her, my mind racing. Something didn't sit right. She never hesitated like that when I asked about her day. But instead of pushing her, I let it slide. For now. As we ate, the tension felt unbearable. I couldn't focus on what she was saying. She was telling me about some new routine they were doing at the studio, but all I could think about was that hesitation. That split second of doubt when I asked her about yoga. Then it happened. She pulled out her phone mid-conversation to check something, and I glanced over, not thinking much of it. But when I saw the screen, my heart sank. It wasn't a text from one of her yoga friends or a notification from Instagram. It was a notification from a rideshare app. I could see it clearly. She had just finished a ride, not 10 minutes before walking through the door. That meant she hadn't come straight from yoga. She had been somewhere else. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at her, my mind racing with a million different thoughts. Where had she gone? Who was she with? Why did she lie? As if she felt my eyes on her, she looked up. "What?" she asked, her voice light, like everything was normal. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work." But inside, I was panicking. This was it. This was the slip-up I'd been waiting for. The proof that something was going on, that she wasn't being honest with me. But I still didn't know what. And the not knowing was driving me insane. After dinner, she went to take a shower, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. For a moment, I stood there, staring at it. I could feel the temptation creeping in. I had never crossed that line before, never gone through her phone. But the rideshare notification, it was right there, staring me in the face, daring me to look deeper. And then, against every instinct telling me to stop, I grabbed her phone and opened it. I went straight to the rideshare history, my heart pounding in my chest. The last ride was from an address I didn't recognize, some random residential street across town. She wasn't at yoga. Not even close. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back, trying to act like nothing had happened. I didn't have all the answers yet, but this was the first real sign. The first undeniable clue that something was wrong. And I couldn't pretend anymore. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept going back to that address. Who lived there? What was she doing there instead of yoga? The questions kept piling up, and with each one, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more. But now I had something real, something I couldn't ignore. And that was when I realized, this wasn't going to end well. After that night, I couldn't let it go. That rideshare notification haunted me. My mind was constantly spinning, trying to piece together what Emily was doing when she wasn't at yoga. Who was she meeting? What was she hiding? Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was seeing someone else, someone who was playing a role, masking the truth underneath. But I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know more. I had to be sure. Otherwise, she'd just brush it off, say I was overreacting, paranoid even. And the last thing I wanted was to accuse her without solid proof. So I made a decision, a hard one. I was going to dig. I was going to find out where she was going when she said she was at yoga, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth in my hands. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her in some way, but I had no choice. I had been living in the dark for too long, and I wasn't going to ignore the signs anymore. The next day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying everything in my head, her strange behavior, the late nights, the hidden phone conversations. And now this. The idea of hiring a private investigator even crossed my mind, but I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I could do some digging on my own first. That evening, when Emily went out again, back to her usual yoga class, I took a different approach. Instead of sitting at home, wondering where she was, I decided to follow her. I know it sounds crazy, but I had to see for myself. I needed to know what was really going on. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my keys and headed out. My heart was pounding the whole time, like I was doing something I shouldn't be. But it was too late to turn back now. She drove across town, just like I suspected. But instead of heading toward her usual yoga studio, she turned off into a quiet residential neighborhood. I kept my distance, making sure not to get too close. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Finally, she pulled up to a small, unremarkable house. The same address I had seen on her rideshare app. She parked and sat in the car for a minute, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Then, I saw him. A man came out of the house, wearing casual clothes, like this was a regular occurrence. He walked straight over to Emily's car, and without hesitation, they hugged. Not a quick, friendly hug. No, this was longer. Too familiar. Too close. I could barely breathe as I watched them. This was it. The proof I needed. All the doubts, all the questions, they weren't just in my head. Something was happening, and Emily had been lying to me for months. Maybe longer. They stood there for a few moments, talking, before they both headed inside the house. And just like that, she was gone. I sat in my car, staring at the house, my mind racing. I had followed her. I had seen it with my own eyes. But now what? I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without knowing the whole story. But what I had just witnessed, that was enough to break something inside me. Everything we had built over the years suddenly felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. I drove home in a daze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even know what to think anymore. Was this guy a random fling? Someone she had been seeing for a while? How long had this been going on behind my back? By the time I got home, Emily was already texting me, pretending like everything was fine. Like she had just finished another yoga class. The lies were so blatant now, it was almost insulting. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering how long I could keep this charade up before I broke. Because one thing was clear now, this wasn't just my imagination. She was hiding something. And sooner or later, the truth was going to come crashing down. After seeing her with him, everything felt different. The world didn't seem real. I drove home that night feeling like my entire life was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and I was just one wrong move away from falling. Emily hadn't just betrayed me, she had shattered the trust I'd spent years building with her. But as much as I wanted to confront her, to scream, to ask how she could do this to me, I knew I wasn't ready. That night, I barely spoke to her. I couldn't look at her without feeling sick to my stomach. I kept replaying the moment she embraced him in front of that house. How many times had this happened? How many lies had I swallowed, thinking I was just overthinking? Emily, of course, acted like nothing had changed. She chatted about her yoga class and how she was feeling so refreshed. It was almost surreal, hearing her talk about a life that wasn't real while I sat there, choking on the truth. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would slip up again. Maybe she'd mention something that didn't line up, or I'd catch another detail that would make her story unravel. But no, she was good. Too good. She was a master at this, at lying straight to my face with no hesitation. It was torture, sitting there, pretending like I didn't know. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, it felt like another stab to the heart. I wanted to grab her, shake her, demand to know why. Why him? Why now? Was I not enough? Was she unhappy? But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, played along with her charade, and watched her go to bed like nothing was wrong. I sat up for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my next move should be. And that's when it hit me, I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while the truth ate away at me. But I still didn't have the full picture. I needed to know more. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to act normal while slowly gathering more information. I checked her phone when she wasn't looking, scanned through messages, emails, anything I could find. But she was careful, everything important had been deleted. She had been doing this for a long time, and it showed. Every trail was clean, every potential clue erased. But I wasn't going to give up. I started tracking her rideshare history, digging into her past trips to that same house. It wasn't just once or twice. She had been going there regularly for months. While I thought she was at yoga, she was with him. It was like a gut punch, realizing just how deep her lies went. I couldn't focus on anything else. Work, friends, everything fell to the wayside as I became obsessed with figuring out the truth. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Or was this just some fling? Every night, I sat across from her at dinner, pretending like I didn't know she was sneaking off to be with someone else. And every night, I felt more and more broken. One night, as she lay next to me, fast asleep, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed and went into the living room, pacing back and forth, my mind racing. I couldn't keep this up. But I also couldn't just confront her without having all the facts. And that's when I made the decision. I was going to get more concrete proof, something undeniable. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. I needed to see them together again, in person, to know exactly what I was dealing with. I started planning. I didn't like where this was going, but I had no choice. I was spiraling, and I needed to regain control, even if that meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. Because the reality was this: my marriage, the life I thought we had, was a lie. And soon, I was going to have to deal with it, one way or another. I had to see it for myself. There was no other way. The only thing worse than living in the dark was pretending I didn't see the truth unraveling in front of me. So, I made a plan. The next time Emily said she was going to yoga, I didn't wait long after she left. I followed her again, but this time I was prepared. My phone was fully charged, ready to record whatever I needed to. I had convinced myself that I had to catch her red-handed, that without solid proof, she would continue spinning her web of lies. She drove the same route, heading back to the same house, and sure enough, there he was, waiting for her. The same man. Tall, athletic, probably mid-30s, like he had just walked out of a fitness magazine. As soon as she got out of the car, they embraced again, the same way as before, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't look away. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed my phone and hit record. My heart was racing in my chest, a mix of anger and devastation twisting together. Watching them, it hit me like a sledgehammer. I had been living a lie for 3 years. She hadn't just been cheating on me, she had been with this guy, this yoga instructor, for years. 3 years. That's how long it had been going on. That's how long she had been sneaking around behind my back, lying straight to my face every time I asked how her day was, or how her yoga class went. It all made sense now, the sudden obsession with yoga, the constant defensiveness, the coldness that had settled between us over the past few years. This wasn't just some fling. This was a long-term affair. I watched as they went inside, shutting the door behind them, like they had done so many times before. I sat in my car, staring at the house, feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. 3 years. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen it? The signs were there, right in front of me, but I had trusted her. I had believed in our marriage, in us. And she had been betraying me the entire time. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the reality of it all hit me. This was it. The proof I had been searching for. The undeniable truth. And as much as it hurt, as much as it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, there was also a strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. She had been lying to me, and now I had the proof. But what was I supposed to do next? I drove home, my mind spinning with 1,000 different thoughts. I had the video. I had the evidence. I could confront her. I could show her the video, demand answers, demand the truth. But what would that even look like? Would she deny it? Would she try to turn it around on me? And what if she didn't? What if she admitted everything? What if she told me she loved him? What would I do then? By the time Emily came home that night, my emotions were all over the place. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything. But at the same time, I wanted to hold on to the version of her I thought I knew, the version that loved me, that I had shared my life with. She came in, acting like nothing was wrong, giving me the same tired excuses about how yoga had run late. I just stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. The woman I loved, the woman I had married, had been living a double life for years. And I was finally seeing it for what it was. As she went to bed, I stayed in the living room, clutching my phone. The video was still there, proof of everything she had hidden from me. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to figure out how I was going to do this, how I was going to confront the woman I thought I knew, and how I was going to walk away from the life we had built together. Because after 3 years of lies, I couldn't pretend anymore. The days following my discovery felt like I was living in a fog. Every moment was heavy, like I was carrying around this enormous secret that was suffocating me. And the worst part? Emily kept acting like nothing was wrong, like we were still the same couple we had always been. She didn't have a clue that I knew everything, that I had seen her with him, that I had the proof sitting on my phone. I thought about confronting her every day. Every single time she walked through the door, pretending to come from yoga, I wanted to throw the truth in her face, to demand answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed a plan, something that would give me some control in all this chaos. Because right now, it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers, and I was barely holding on. That week, I started pulling back. I didn't want to be around her. Every time she touched me, it felt like a lie. Every kiss, every smile, it was all fake, part of this twisted game she'd been playing for years. I'd come home late from work, or I'd make excuses to leave the house early, anything to avoid being around her. She noticed, of course. How could she not? "Jake, are you okay?" she asked one night, sitting next to me on the couch. Her voice was soft, concerned, like she actually cared. It made me sick. "Yeah, just work stress," I lied, not even bothering to look at her. If I looked into her eyes, I'd lose it. The anger, the betrayal, it was all bubbling up inside me, ready to explode. But I held it together, barely. She sighed and leaned closer, her hand resting on my leg. "You've been so distant lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. Something I wasn't telling her. I had a whole video on my phone of her with another man, and she wanted to know if I was keeping secrets. I stood up abruptly, brushing her hand off. "I'm fine, Emily. Just tired." My voice was cold, and I could see the confusion on her face. She was starting to sense it, that things weren't right. But she had no idea just how wrong things were. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay there in the dark, my mind spinning. How was I going to do this? How was I going to confront her? I had the proof, but I still didn't know what I wanted. Did I want her to confess? Did I want to hear the lies come out of her mouth one last time? Or was I just looking for an excuse to walk away? I wasn't ready for a confrontation. Not yet. So instead, I kept digging. The next day, while she was at work, I started going through more of her things. I needed to know just how deep this rabbit hole went. I went through her drawers, her papers, anything that might give me more insight into the woman I thought I knew. And that's when I found it. A small envelope, tucked away in the back of her closet. It looked innocent enough, but when I opened it, my heart dropped. Inside were receipts, hotel bookings, dinner reservations, all in the city. All on days when she was supposed to be at yoga. It wasn't just a few random trips, either. It was a pattern. A pattern of deception that went back months, even years. She had been seeing him regularly, sneaking around with this guy while I was working late, while I was home waiting for her to come back from her so-called yoga classes. The proof was all there, laid out in front of me. This wasn't some fling. This was a full-blown affair that had been going on for years. And I had been completely in the dark. I sat there on the floor of our bedroom, holding those receipts, feeling my entire world crumble around me. There was no coming back from this. Emily had built her life on lies, and I had been living in them without even knowing it. Now, there was no doubt. I had all the proof I needed. The question was, what was I going to do with it? The receipts were like a nail in the coffin. Every little piece of paper was another lie, another betrayal. As I sat there in the middle of our bedroom, staring at the evidence, the reality of it all hit me like a freight train. There was no more pretending. No more hoping it was just some misunderstanding or some phase. Emily had been cheating on me for 3 years, and she had lied about it every single day. I wanted to scream, to break something, to let out all the anger and frustration that had been building up inside me for months. But I didn't. I just sat there, numb, unable to move. The person I had spent my life with, the woman I had trusted completely, had been deceiving me for years. It felt like I had been living in a stranger's life, in a marriage that wasn't even real. I don't know how long I sat there, but at some point, I realized something. I was done. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was okay, couldn't keep going through the motions while my heart was breaking. Something had to change. That's when I made the decision. I was going to confront her. Not in a fit of rage, not with accusations or screaming. I was going to lay it all out in front of her, the video, the receipts, everything. And I was going to make her admit what she had done. No more lies, no more games. I needed to hear it from her own mouth, no matter how painful it was going to be. But I wasn't going to do it right away. I needed to be prepared. I needed to have everything lined up, my next steps, the divorce papers, the exit strategy. I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me, wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate the situation. I needed to be in control for once. So, over the next few days, I quietly started putting things in place. I met with a lawyer, explaining the situation and showing him the evidence I had gathered. He was sympathetic, but straightforward. I had a solid case for divorce. With the proof I had, I wouldn't have to worry about her getting much. It was a small relief, but it didn't make the emotional toll any easier to bear. At home, I kept my distance from Emily. I didn't want to tip her off that something was coming, so I continued to play the part of the distant, overworked husband. She noticed, of course. She even tried to get close to me a couple of times, but I couldn't bring myself to touch her. The thought of her being with someone else, then coming home to me like nothing was wrong, made my skin crawl. And yet, she still had no idea. She had no clue that I knew everything, that her entire double life was about to come crashing down. She was still living in her bubble, thinking she had gotten away with it. But not for much longer. The breaking point came on a Thursday. She was heading out again, to yoga, of course. I watched her get ready, the way she carefully packed her bag, slipped her phone into her pocket. She looked so calm, so collected, like she had done this 1,000 times before. And she probably had. As she walked toward the door, she glanced back at me. "I'll be home late tonight, don't wait up," she said, her voice light and casual, like she wasn't about to go cheat on me for the 100th time. I just nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. After she left, I sat there in the silence of our home, staring at the door. This was it. This was the last time she would ever lie to me like that. I was done waiting. I was done living in this nightmare. The next morning, I'd be ready. I'd have everything I needed, my proof, my plan, and my resolve. The confrontation was coming. And there would be no turning back. The morning after Emily's last lie, I woke up with a sense of finality. Today was the day. Everything I'd been holding in, everything I'd uncovered, was about to come crashing down on her. There was no turning back. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents in front of me, divorce papers, the video on my phone, the receipts. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. I wasn't sure how she would react, anger, tears, denial, but I was ready for it. I had to be. When Emily came home later that morning, she looked the same as always, like everything was normal, like she hadn't just spent the night with someone else. She smiled at me, that same smile I used to love, but now it just felt hollow. "Hey, you're up early," she said, tossing her bag on the counter, moving around the kitchen like nothing was wrong. "What do you want to do for breakfast?" I stood there, watching her, my pulse quickening. This was it. It was time. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, but firm. She looked over at me, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the chair. "Sit down." Her brow furrowed, but she sat, sensing the weight in my tone. For a second, it looked like she was about to ask another question, but I didn't give her the chance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening the video. My thumb hovered over the play button for a second longer than I intended, but then, I pressed it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The video said it all. I watched her face as she saw herself with him, standing by the car, their arms wrapped around each other. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. The color drained from her face. When the video ended, I put the phone down on the table. "You lied to me," I said, my voice calm but cold. "For 3 years." She sat there, stunned, staring at the phone like it was some kind of nightmare. "Jake." Don't," I cut her off, shaking my head. I don't want to hear excuses. I know everything. The hotel receipts. The nights you said you were at yoga. All of it. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth, and you kept lying. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, she looked like she was about to break. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice shaky. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The woman sitting across from me was not the person I had spent the last 15 years with. She was someone else, someone who had built an entire world of lies around us. You've been hurting me for 3 years, I said quietly. Every single day you lied was another knife in my back. She wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. Jake, I was lost. I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused, and he. Don't, I repeated, louder this time. Don't make this about him. This is about you. You made this choice. You chose to cheat. For 3 years, Emily. Do you even realize what that means? How much you destroyed? She sat there, sobbing now, but I couldn't feel anything but numbness. The anger that had been boiling inside me had settled into something quieter, colder. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, and now that it was here, all I felt was the finality of it. This was the end of us. I'm done, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm done with the lies, done with pretending we can fix this. I've already spoken to a lawyer. These are the divorce papers. I slid them across the table toward her. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Jake, please, no. We can work through this. I'll end it with him, I swear. I love you. You don't love me, I said, my tone sharp, cutting through her words. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me every single day for the past 3 years. Love doesn't look like this. She sat there, crying, but I couldn't feel anything for her anymore. The love I had for her had been eroded by every lie, every betrayal. There was nothing left. I'll be staying with a friend for a while, I said, standing up. You can have the house for now, but once the papers are signed, we'll figure out the rest. She didn't try to stop me. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, watching as I walked away. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of it all lift, just a little. The truth was out. The lies were over. And even though it hurt like hell, I knew I was doing the right thing. This was the beginning of the end. But it was also the beginning of something new, a life without the lies, without the betrayal. As I drove away, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after the confrontation felt like I was floating through a life that wasn't my own. I stayed with my friend, Mark, crashing on his couch while I tried to wrap my head around everything. He didn't push me to talk, and I was grateful for that. All I could manage were the basic tasks, getting up, going to work, coming back to his place. My brain was still processing that everything I had built with Emily was gone, shattered by years of lies. The divorce process started moving quickly after that. Emily didn't fight it, she couldn't. The evidence was all there, and I made sure she understood I wasn't going to let her twist the story to her advantage. We had a few brief conversations about logistics, but they were cold, formal. We were no longer the couple that once shared late-night laughs and dreams of the future. That part of my life had died the moment I saw her with him. One afternoon, about a week after I'd left, she called me. It was the first time we'd spoken on the phone since the confrontation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I answered. Jake. Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she didn't know how to speak to me anymore. What is it, Emily? I asked, my tone flat. I didn't have the energy for more lies, more tears. I need you to know how sorry I am, she said, her voice breaking. I know you don't want to hear it, but I am. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? Sorry wasn't going to fix the years of deception. It wasn't going to rebuild the trust that had been obliterated. It's too late for sorry, I finally said. You made your choices. Now we have to live with them. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to hold back her sobs, but I didn't feel the need to comfort her anymore. This was the bed she had made. Jake. I loved you, she whispered. I still do. I never stopped. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Emily. You didn't. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me like this. Whatever you feel, it's not love. Not anymore. More silence. I could feel the weight of everything she wasn't saying, all the things she wished she could undo. But there was no going back now. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, I said, before ending the call. After I hung up, I realized that it was the closure I hadn't even known I needed. There was no going back to the way things were. Emily was a part of my past now, and I had to start thinking about my future. I had spent so much time wondering how she could do this to me, but now, it was time to focus on what came next for me. The divorce was finalized quickly after that. She kept the house, which I didn't care about anymore. It was full of memories I didn't want. I moved into a small apartment, something modest but mine. The weight on my chest that had been there for months finally started to lift, little by little. The pain wasn't gone, but it was becoming something I could live with. Something I could heal from. Friends and family rallied around me, giving me the support I hadn't realized I needed. Mark, especially, was a constant presence, making sure I wasn't alone with my thoughts for too long. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding the pieces of my life that Emily had left shattered. And slowly, I began to find myself again. There were still hard days, days where the weight of the betrayal felt unbearable. Days when I wondered if I had been a fool for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her so completely. But those days grew fewer and farther between. One night, months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone. I thought about deleting the video, the proof of her betrayal, but instead, I did something different. I played it one last time, watching the moment that had changed everything. And then, I hit delete. It was time to move on. Looking back, I learned that betrayal doesn't just come from one place, one person, it seeps into every part of your life, making you question everything you thought you knew. But once you face it, once you decide to stop letting it control you, there's a kind of freedom in that. So here I am, on the other side. Still hurting, still healing, but moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe again.